A very warm welcome to our audience. Thank you for joining this knowledge sharing panel hosted by Equal Measures 2030, which is part of the SDG Global Festival of Action. The panel is themed on turning it around for gender equality, something that has become even more pressing since the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Fridah Githuku. I'm the Executive Director of GROOTS Kenya, a national network of grassroots women organization. Equal Measures 2030 is a cross-sector partnership from local to global level that connect data and evidence to advocacy and action for gender equality and SDGs. GROOTS Kenya is a national influencing partner for Equal Measures in Kenya. The Equal Measures 2030 has made bold investment to accelerate SDGs action, including the launch of the SDG Gender Index in 2019 that tell us the progress of 129 countries around the world in gender equality and sustainable development goals. Data for advocacy curriculum that is equipping data advocates with evidence for advocacy across continent and driving change, and now the bending the curve research. Our session will be 45 minutes, and our speakers include Alison Holder, who is the director of Equal Measures 2030. She has 20 years experience working in international development, policy advocacy, campaigning work on issues ranging from inequality, tax justice, and corporate accountability. Dr. Nilangi from Society for Health Alternatives. She is a specialist in women's access to healthcare, community-based health approaches, and health equity. Her organization is also a partner of Equal Measures in India. Julie Kamathi is a young woman leader from Forum for African Women Educationalists, and she's focused on improving girls' access to education in crisis and emergency settings. Nessa Medina is a member of CLADEM in Latin America. Her specialty is in violence against women and sexual reproductive rights, as well as strategic communication, national and international advocacy, and CLADEM is a regional partner of Equal Measures in Latin America and the Caribbean region. Our program, after these opening remarks, we'll listen to Alison, who will present the finding of bending the curve research. And after that, we'll dive into the contextual issues around that, the research. And we'll have the speakers talking to us on issues ranging from family planning, education, workplace equality, safety, and women in government. And Alison will close the session for us. After that, we can have further dialogue, questions and answers on the Twitter handle of Equal Measures 2030 and interact with the panelists. At this point, I would like to invite Alison to take the virtual floor.
Thanks very much, Fridah. Hi, I'm Alison Holder, and I'm the director of Equal Measures 2030. We're honored to be here today with representatives from across our global partnership to talk about how we can turn it around for gender equality. Equal Measures 2030 is a collaboration of national, regional, and global leaders from feminist networks, civil society, international development, and the private sector. We connect data and evidence with advocacy and action on gender equality to transform the lives of women and girls and realize the SDGs. Over a year ago, if I tried to convince you that progress on gender equality was moving too slowly or was too fragile, you might have been less inclined to believe me. But 1 year on from the start of the COVID pandemic, and we are seeing how this crisis has shone a spotlight on the inequalities that hold women and girls back. The pandemic has also shown starkly how some groups of girls and women face overlapping forms of discrimination, whether because of their race, their age, their gender identity, because they have a disability, or so many other factors. Gender inequality means that the pandemic has wreaked greater havoc on our societies and our economies. By not taking sufficient action on women's rights, we're prolonging the crisis and impeding our ability to recover. For example, when women continue to bear most of the burden of caring for families and communities, and when they're stuck in lower paid jobs, they may be driven out of the workforce in times of crisis. Or when social protection systems aren't working and women have no safety net, they may instead have to go to work, even in crowded, unsafe, or insecure workplaces. When girls are valued less, school closures will make it even less likely that they will ever have the chance at an education. And when societies are under stress, violence against women rises. Pre-COVID, our global partnership was raising the alarm about the pace of progress on gender equality. In light of the COVID crisis, that's now a full-blown emergency. Simply, we won't be able to realize the vision set out in the SDGs if we don't ensure that girls and women have equal rights and opportunities. And yet, as the EM 2030 data shows, to date, no country has achieved gender equality. Today, we're going to use the EM 2030 data as a backdrop. We'll look briefly at the SDG Gender Index, and then we'll go deeper into 5 key gender equality issues to look at how quickly or slowly countries have been moving and what that pace of change means for whether we'll meet the 2030 goals. Let's start with an introduction to EM 2030's SDG Gender Index, and then we'll dive a bit deeper. So now we'll move over to a short video.
The SDG Gender Index is the most comprehensive tool available to track gender equality across 129 countries, 14 of the 17 SDGs, and 51 really critical gender equality issues. We've seen that 1.4 billion girls and women live in countries who receive a very poor failing score on the index, and no country received an excellent score. These are really sobering findings. At the same time, there are messages of hope in the index findings. We've seen that the goals that the world performs best on are those that have had really coordinated, concerted investment of policy, attention, and funding over the last 10 to 20 years. And we've seen that on issues like water and sanitation, hunger and nutrition, girls' education, that with attention, we can make progress.
2019 SDG Gender Index provided a snapshot of how countries were faring on gender equality at one static point. But we wanted to dig into the data more to look at change over time. So we undertook what we call the Bending the Curve research. You can find the 5 issues we studied in Bending the Curve on the slide here. And our expert speakers will be taking you through each of these 5 issues in just a moment. We would have loved to study pace of change on many more issues, but we were really restricted in our choice because of data gaps. Even compiling data on past trends for just these 5 issues across 129 countries was a major effort. So we looked at past trends and how quickly things have been changing over the past 10 or 20 years. And that allowed us to forecast how much progress countries will make by the year 2030 if they keep moving at the current pace. What did we find? Well, overall, we found that global progress on these 5 issues, which are absolutely central to securing gender equality overall, has been limping along. At a global level, the lines measuring progress are nearly flat. We found that 67 countries, home to 2.1 billion girls and women, won't achieve any of these 5 gender equality targets if they continue at their current pace. We also found that several high-income countries are stagnating or even seeing reversals in progress on some issues. So what the chart on this slide shows is a combination of 2 key elements from the EM 2030 data. On the left side, we have countries' SDG Gender Index score. That measures how gender equal that country is today. And on the bottom, we measure how rapidly each country has been moving over the past 10 or 20 years. This helps you see a more nuanced picture than you'd find in a standard index ranking. For example, in the top left corner, you'll find countries that may have fairly high levels of gender equality, but who have been moving very slowly or even moving in the wrong direction on key gender equality issues over recent decades. And in the bottom right corner, you'll find countries that have a more challenging starting point when it comes to gender equality, but who have been making rapid progress on at least some gender equality issues. As we are all here with a motivation to turn it around for the SDGs, I will finish with the message of hope that comes out of the Bending the Curve research. We found that once we dug into the data, we could see that some countries have made astonishingly fast progress over the past 10 or 20 years. And if all countries match the pace of those fast-moving countries over the next decade, nearly 3/4 of the world's girls and women could instead live in countries that would reach 4 or even all 5 of these gender equality targets by 2030. The experts on our panel are all powerful, data-driven advocates with whom EM 2030 has the pleasure to work. During the panel, they'll share the areas of progress and backsliding on each of the themes within their own context, situating these global findings in the daily realities of their organizations and the girls and women with whom they work. I'll now hand it over to Nilangi, who is joining us from SAHAJ in India and who will delve further into the family planning data.
Thank you, Alison. My name is Dr. Nilangi and I'm from an organization called SAHAJ in India. So I'll be talking about the indicator which is related to access to modern forms of contraception. So what does this indicator tell us? It tells us about the proportion of women who are married or in union in the age group 15 to 49 years and whose need for family planning is met with modern methods. Now, this is the official SDG 3 indicator, and we have looked at data from the year 2000 to 2018 from UNPD. So first and foremost, it is very important to understand that bodily autonomy is central to gender equality. And secondly, a lack of access to modern family planning methods increases women's health risks such as STDs or unsafe abortions. So given these importance, I think it is very important to look at the access to modern contraceptives. What is the global picture about it? So it is worrisome that the progress on this indicator has been really slow. In the year 2000, there were 56% of girls and women who had access globally, which increased to just 68% by 2018. Another worrisome fact is that there are 14 countries where the proportion of women with access to contraception has gone down in this period. So if we continue with the same pace, we will not be able to achieve our target by 2030. We have to at least hasten by 3 times. If you look at the regional picture, it shows that there's one positive finding that the regional average for sub-Saharan Africa improved from 32% in 2000 to 54% in 2018, which is good to see. Good to see that countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Sierra Leone, and Mauritania saw the fastest average annual rates of change. Whereas on the other side, if you look at the countries in Europe and North America, there are around 7 countries for which the performance has gone down. And still today, 1 in 5 women in this region lacks access to modern contraceptives. Now we'll come to India, where we have been working on SRHR issues for more than 3 decades. Who adopted the family planning program just immediately after the independence. So it's been almost 60, 70 years that we are working on improving the access to modern contraceptives. Yet, if you see between 2000 to 2018, the progress has been just 6.9 percentage points, which is much lesser than the global average and also the average for the Asia and Pacific region. And at this rate of change, India will achieve its target only by 2086, which is almost 56 years later than the SDG achievement that we are expecting by 2030. And given the population of India, it is very important to understand that 22% of women not having access means 84 million women in India will not have access to contraceptives in 2030, which is a large number. Then we are talking about all these figures which are in the pre-COVID period. And as all of us know, that COVID-19 pandemic has serious effects on the health system itself. Apart from all other systems, health system has been badly affected because the frontline healthcare providers are now busy providing COVID-19 services, like they are busy with screening. So obviously the routine services like like providing contraceptives has taken backseat. What does it mean? It means that globally the studies have shown that in the period where the countries were in lockdown, around 47 million women in 114 countries did not get access to contraceptives. Coming to India, even if we have the best case scenario that the health system was functioning and providing other services, we can see that between 1.94 to 2.95 million women did not get access to, there are going to be unintended pregnancies. And out of these, around 800,000 will be unsafe abortions, which means higher maternal mortality. So this tells us the importance of access to modern contraceptives. And if we really want to improve the situation, there are 3 or 4 things which need immediate attention. One is we should stop calling it family planning and call it access to contraception, because the moment you call it family planning, it denotes that it is for the couples who want to limit the families, and other persons like single women and all are left behind. Second, very important group which is being left behind, especially in countries like India, where there are laws which criminalize the sexual activity below 18 years, is the young people. So young person face severe barriers which we need to work on immediately. Third, it is often seen that contraception is women's responsibility. And if you see in India, the percentage of male sterilization is hardly 1.5 to 2%. So it is high time now that men start taking their responsibility of contraception. And fourth and very important last point is the quality of services. Though we are just looking at numbers in this indicator, we are aware that women also need good quality services. For example, when the healthcare providers are behind achieving the targets, they often forget the quality, as we have seen in India, that in the PPIUCD program, the informed consent is not taken properly, and women are informed very last minute about the insertion of property. And I think this is the blatant violation of their rights. So at the time of looking at quantity, we should also focus on quality of services. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nilangi. And I'm now handing over to Julie from FAWE in Kenya to talk about education.
Thank you so much, Alison. I'll start off by acknowledging that significant efforts have been made to globally close the gender gap in education. However, the rate of girls' completion of secondary education has been slow, globally increasing from 43% in 2000 to 59% in 2018, as shown in the projected diagram. It's important to note that some countries have done extremely well in terms of achieving gender equality in education. And these countries include Ghana and Angola, where the number of girls completing secondary education has been increasing by more than 10% between 2000 and 2018. For example, in Ghana, the percentage of girls completing secondary education increased from 20% in 2003 to 41% in 2015, quite impressive. On the other hand, some countries have had small but significant declines in the number of girls completing secondary education. These countries include Sri Lanka and Russia, among others. In Kenya, where I sit, the rate of girls' completion of secondary education has also been slow, and this can be attributed to factors such as insufficient financial resources and also poverty. COVID-19 has also widened the gap, with a significant number of girls getting pregnant and having to stop their education for some time. And so we need to come up with strategies such as re-entry policies, which will enable the girls go back to school, learn, perform well, and transition to tertiary education. And so we all know that educating a girl means educating the whole community. Research has also shown that there is a strong correlation between higher rates of secondary education and lower levels of marriages among young women between the age of 20 and 24. And this can be illustrated by data from countries such as Rwanda and Niger. From the 2018 Bending the Curve report, it's clear that only 24 countries will be able to achieve universal secondary education by 2030. And so we need to move 3 times faster so that all the countries globally achieve this goal by 2030. I'd also like to point out that if we move at the right pace, 85 million more girls will be able to complete their secondary education by 2030. I hope we all get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. Next, we're moving over to talk about workplace equality laws with Nessa.
Thanks, Alison. I hope we get there, Julie, as well. In terms of workplace equality laws, in many countries, legal systems do not protect women against discrimination in the workforce. This indicator that's seen in the screen captures the extent to that countries that have laws mandating gender equality in the workplace, covering anti-discrimination, equal pay, paid leave, treatment of pregnant workers, and laws that put restrictions on types of job women can do. At the current pace of change, the world won't meet the target of all countries with 100% scores until 2051. That's too long. There has been no negative change in work laws globally, but a lot of studies across every region. In Latin America and the Caribbean, Economic Commission has said that the crisis generated by the COVID-19 pandemic had a negative impact in the occupation and working conditions of women in Latin America and Caribbean, generating a setback of more than a decade in the progress achieved in terms of labor participation. The labor participation rate for women stood at 40% in 2020, while that of men was 69%. It is also calculated that the unemployment rate for women reached 12% in 2020, a percentage that rises to 22% if the same labor participation rate for women in 2019 is assumed. In 2020, there was an overwhelming departure of women from the labor force who, because they had to attend to the demands for care in their homes, did not resume their job search. 57% of women in Latin America and 54% in the Caribbean are employed in sectors that are expected to have a greater negative effects in terms of employment and income due to the pandemic. Women in the region are a crucial part of the first line of response to the pandemic. 73% of the people employed in the health sector are women who have had to face a series of extreme working conditions, such as long working hours, which add to the greater risk to which the personnel of the health sector are exposed to the virus. All this in a regional context in which wage discrimination persists, since the earnings of women who work in the health field are 20% lower than those of men in the same sector. In addition to mainstreaming the gender perspective in all recovery policies, affirmative actions are required in the field of physical labor, productive, economic, and social policies that protect the rights of women achieved in the last decade, avoiding setbacks that they confront gender equalities in the short, medium, and term. This is what we need to aim to. This is what we need to work towards. And this is what makes us reach the goals sooner than what you can see in the graphic here, hopefully closer to 2030.
Thank you so much, Nessa. I'm handing over to Fridah now, back to Fridah, to talk about women's perceptions of safety.
Thank you, Alison. Globally, there is no progress on ensuring that women feel safer. The trend, as we can see in this graph, the trend has been flat. Between 2006 and 2020, the perception on safety has declined by 43%, and 50% of the countries where there was decline on perception of safety, they didn't have existing legislation on domestic violence. It's also disheartening to learn that some of the countries that registered the largest decline in perceived safety are in Africa, and that include Mauritania, Niger, Tunisia, Senegal, and of course, outside Africa, Venezuela. We will not make progress or achieve SDGs, and particularly Sustainable Goal number 5 on gender equality, if we do not deal with perceptions on safety and issues of violence against women and girls. But that said, of course, I also allowed the Equal Measures 2030 because I know that data on safety and violence, and particularly violence against women and girls, is hard to come by. It is hard to even analyze and compare. And without that in-depth examination, then it's very difficult to be able to provoke progress in that area. Nevertheless, we've also used anecdotal evidence that shows or collaborates what we are seeing in Bending the Curve research, that violence is actually on the rise, and the COVID pandemic hasn't made it any better. In fact, here in Kenya, and I think globally now, the women and the feminist movement refer to it as the shadow pandemic. Probably it should even be the main or parallel pandemic. GROOTS Kenya has been collecting data, citizen-generated data around perceptions of women and girls' safety, just to collaborate the global data, but also to see whether it would bring out different perspectives. I can say confidently that it collaborates with the information that we are getting from this research. And it also tells us that the safety perception is lower in urban areas and in cities, and especially in the settlement and slum, but also in remote rural areas. And that tells us two things. One is that there is need to factor women's safety in infrastructural development in cities and towns, whether it is in terms of defining the built-up ratio, the built-up area ratio, or it is in development of street lights, pavement, our open spaces. And also that tells us that the issue of safety and violence against women and girls is not an issue of gender activists or feminists. It's a matter that needs the attention of engineers, needs the attention of planners, and that is to say that it is beyond government. The private sector also have a big role to play if we are to make progress in this target. The other point, number 2, is that for us to realize this target and to have women and girls feeling more safe and reduce violence, government must increase their investment in public service in the rural and remote areas where women report to feel less safe, whether it is in terms of health, infrastructure, water, schools, energy, because that strenuous search for these basic services that really define their livelihood increase their risk exposure, and it's more for young women, for children, and of course for the elderly. I know that lack of legislation and policies is cited, and there's evidence that the countries that have no legislation, that women feel even more unsafe. But the presence of those policies also does not guarantee action. And I'm saying this because in Kenya, we already have the Prevention Against Domestic Violence Act, we have the Sexual Offences Act in place, but the issue of safety still remain a major impediment in women empowerment and gender equality. The critical ingredient here is the investment in terms of financial resources, human resources, but also time. And this has been demonstrated to a certain extent. President Kenyatta expressed himself, I think in 2017, around the issue of ending harmful practices in Kenya. And you can see since that time, when he offered that strong leadership and mobilized a lot of political will, that there have been a lot of increased investment, both financially and also in terms of human resource from the security mechanism to bring to an end the female genital mutilation. Of course, the issues of women safety are much more than that, and we should not cherry pick, or government should not cherry pick on what issue they want to address. And the other thing that we need to look at is how women perceive their own bodies and their own lives, because there's a perception and an attitude that needs to change so that we can all embrace our body autonomy and put to an end the justification and the sanitization of violence. It's laudable, I think, that gender-based violence has made it to one of the 6 action coalition of the Beijing +25. And we are excited that Kenya, where the Kenyan government is one of the leaders amongst other governments. And we are hopeful that this will help in mobilizing adequate investment in generating political will, and that Kenya, alongside all the other government, will offer strong global leadership so that we can bring this vice to an end. And we are definitely, as stakeholders, all called upon to support this government, to support the other international organizations that are part of that coalition, so that when we do the bending the curve research again, that we will be seeing different statistics. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Fridah. And I'm handing back over to Nessa to talk about women in government.
Thanks, Alison, and all the previous insights and reflections that we had on the situation of these 5 main topics that this report addresses. I think it's no coincidence, of course, that the ministerial representation of women is the last of this issue, because it combines and also kind of shows where action can be put into place from all the recommendations that we find all around the world to move forward with SDGs goals. So the global picture is that, again, what we've seen in the others, at the current pace of change, the world won't meet the target. But this time, it just moves a lot more forward. So in 2066, 11 countries, however, had reached parity in cabinets in 2019. Spain has 65% of the parliament, Nicaragua 56, Sweden 55, Albania, Colombia, Costa Rica, Rwanda, Canada, France, South Africa, and Ethiopia have 50% or closer to 50% of the parliament. And 6 countries in the world had 0 women ministers. 20% of government minister posts globally are held by women. 23%. and 77 million girls and women live in countries that do not have a single female minister. And what we've learned so far is that it's not only what happens when women get to the position, but many times the obstacles they face are prior even to the elections or to get to political participation in their countries. So what we've learned in Latin American organizations, especially with the work that national partners like La Ruta Pacifica, the Pacific Route of Women in Colombia, has showed us through the partnership with Equal Measures 2030, it's that violence against women in politics is increasingly recognized on their members as an emergent tactic to detain women's political participation. Economic violence acts seeking to control women's access to or behavior in the political realm by systematically restrict access to economic resources which are otherwise available to men, making political so difficult or frustrating that women are led to withdraw of their own accord or to reduce the chances that women can do their jobs effectively, though affecting their future political careers. The tactics that have been used to stop political participation of women range from this economic violence, but also even get to physical violence. Women in Latin America, around the world, are facing threats, their lives have been threatened, their families, they have to choose many times if they continue to run in this process and seek that they are entitled by law, but there are being these other obstacles that are trying to make them outside of the political field. So they won't get to be representatives of their people, of all women and girls, of their communities. Democracy is challenged when public officials are prevented, though intimidation and coercion, from exercising the function to which they have been elected or appointed. Violence against women in politics not only threatens to hollow the national and international commitments to gender balanced decision making, but it can also affect the integrity of the political system itself. At this point, what we urge national leaders, political party leaders, governments, is that laws need to take place in order to prevent these obstacles of women and allow fully and in equality of conditions the participation of women in politics. So when they come and be part of the government, allow them to come and change will come with them. Allow them to have the voice, and the voice of women will come with them.
Thank you very much, Nessa. So that concludes the 5 speakers diving deeper into the issues that we found in our Bending the Curve research. And I think I agree with Nessa, it's really interesting to finish on the topic of whether women are reaching those most senior government positions, what our research looked at. And if we think of that in light of the COVID pandemic, and I think all around the world, we've seen examples or media attention brought to countries that have done better, shall we say, during the COVID pandemic, being those led by women. And I think what's really interesting is to look at the evidence that shows that when you have more women in powerful positions, you have more policies, social policies, better social policies, more policies directed at families. And I think if we think of women's access to power and leadership and the impact that a focus on social policies, policies for the family, policies for gender equality could have on all of the 5 issues that we talked about here today. I think it's a really great point to end on. And I think the panel for me today really shows, in a way, the power and the beauty of the SDGs as a global framework that sets targets and norms and themes that we need to focus on, but that really where the action happens within countries, within municipalities, at the subnational county level. And I think all of our speakers here today bring together that kind of global to local role that the SDGs can play in driving transformative progress. And I think combined here in 2021, looking at this year as an inflection point on gender equality, because we are also at the anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. And this year we'll have the Generation Equality Forum, which is really needs to be that inflection point that really turns things around for gender equality. So 2021, we have 9 years left on the SDGs, and we have the Generation Equality Forum, really an incredibly important point for us to be talking about turning it around for gender equality. So I want to thank our partners for sharing their experience and insights. It is absolutely the best part of my job, being able to work with and learn from advocates across the Equal Measures 2030 partnership. I think what is clear is that across the issues and country or regional contexts we've heard about today, we need to pick up the pace of progress for gender equality. But we've also talked about there being some good news when it comes to the potential to turn it around for gender equality. So by accelerating progress on gender equality, we can accelerate progress towards all of the other goals that we're celebrating here at the festival today. And EM 2030's own research has shown that rapid change on gender equality is possible. Together, we have the opportunity to make this challenging moment a turning point for gender equality and for progress on the whole 2030 agenda. We already have the blueprint for transformative action outlined in the SDGs and in all of the human rights frameworks that underpin it. To achieve the vision of the SDGs, we need advocates like you to put pressure on your governments to ensure they're putting in place the laws, the policies, the budget allocations that have long been promised to girls and women in global agreements, and to inspire champions from across sectors to take action to promote gender equality. Every individual action matters. These actions require bold approaches, bold ideas, and raising our collective ambition. For anyone viewing who's keen to see how your country is doing on gender equality, you can visit the EM 2030 Data Hub at data.em2030.org and explore your country's track record and the projections on gender equality, and check out how your country scored on the 2019 SDG Gender Index. Be sure to follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get all the latest news on how collectively we can turn it around for gender equality. For those on Twitter, you can join us for a live Q&A where you can engage directly with the panelists. Just find us at the Twitter handle @Equal2030. Thank you.